All right.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I've got a really interesting author to introduce you to tonight, Hadassah Jacobs. She's coming to us from Jerusalem in Israel. She's the author of a new book, Soros versus Trump. Soros versus Trump. A lot of us have heard both those names, so I'm interested to hear what Hadassah has to say. This book, Soros versus Trump, highlights the issues and the men that are dividing America today. She's also the chief content strategist for a marketing company in Chicago, Olive Tree Works, and the executive director of a new think tank, ID3 Strategic Solutions. Hadassah is a content alchemist. A content alchemist. I got to find out what a content alchemist is. And digital polymath who graduated cum laude from Florida Atlantic University with a BA in Jewish Studies and History. She holds an MA in National Security from Haifa University and is currently a PhD candidate with her thesis on the ideological trends that undermine the U.S. and Israeli ethos. What a wonderful background that you've got. I'm looking forward to this conversation. Hadassah Jacobs, welcome to the show.
Well, it's very nice to be here. I want to thank you. And I want to thank your friend, Mark Borkowski, who is the president of the Mercantile and Acquisitions Company. But he is also part of our think tank in donor acquisitions. And I want to thank him for getting in touch with you. And thank you so much for having me today.
My pleasure. So tell me, why a book about Trump and Soros?
Well, it all started while I was doing my master's at Haifa University. I received an email, and the email asked me specifically why I thought Trump would win the 2016 presidential election. And I wrote back real quick. I said, this is why I think, just a quick blurb. I think that he's got the vote of the people, and I'll answer the rest in a letter. Well, when I started to research what were the issues that were behind why I believed he would win, I started to come across networks connected to George Soros. And I started to come across a lot of financing from George Soros. And with that, I started to dig into who was really behind Hillary Clinton's campaign. And that every avenue I turned, I was learning about George Soros, who was just basically in my purview, probably because of Glenn Beck. Maybe several years earlier, he had mentioned him. However, I didn't know that much about him. So the more I noticed that connected to the organizations that were attacking Trump was Soros and the Open Society Foundation, I realized we have something bigger happening here than just a normal election. And that's how I got started in writing the book, Soros versus Trump. It was all over a question.
And so are you of the opinion, therefore, that Soros's funding campaign donations to Hillary Clinton were inappropriate or wrong?
Well, I don't think it had anything to do with wrong or right as far as him funding. It was the fact that he was funding. And that took me into something even deeper. And that is really who was George Soros, what he believed, and why he was funding the Democratic Party. So, and that was really before Obama came on stage, and before we started to see this very serious trend of progressive left politics in America. So that's how and why I really started to notice that the election was really about ideology. And Hillary Clinton was really not the one pulling the strings behind the election, that I really thought this election is more between Trump and Soros, but very few people know that Soros is behind the scenes.
So why don't you take a step back and tell us a little bit about George Soros and who he is and where he comes from?
So many people know that he was born in the Ukraine. Or in Hungary, I apologize, not the Ukraine. The Ukraine's on my mind because of what's happening in Ukraine, but in Hungary. And he was born to a Jewish family, and he was protected throughout the Holocaust because he was, or his father had paid a man named Baumbach to make him his Christian godson and protect him from deportation towards the end of the war. However, that is very well known. And I want to move on to what happened after that. George ultimately was protected. He ultimately left Hungary. He went to England, got his degree in economics from the London School of Economics. And in that time, he met Karl Popper. And Karl Popper was the one who had actually written a book called The Open Society. And the Open Society really detailed the difference between what he believed to be an open society versus a closed society. And the case study for the closed society from Karl Popper was the Jews. It was the Jewish community that was Torah-centric, believed in the Torah, had a very strong religious following, a strong religious framework, and he considered that a closed society. And then it morphs into something a little bit more, which is anything that really was rooted in moral law was a closed society. And so George Soros went on to get his degree in economics, but he saw a fundamental flaw in Karl Popper's theory and in his theory about the open society. And that was that there was really no way with his theory that he could manipulate, and this is almost a quote, manipulate the masses politically. And so he came up with another theory that was adjoined to the Popper theory called the theory or the reflexive theory. And that theory, he used it in his economic dealings and building his hedge funds and all of that. But he had primarily created that theory for the political science educational platform. And it wasn't until much later that he actually brought that in. It started the Central European University and brought in his belief systems on his theory of the open society and how to actually utilize media to share his ideas and build an influence community and a network based on his theory.
Now, he was quite a successful financier, was he not?
Extremely successful.
Why? What do you think it's based on? Is it based on this theory, or is it based on hard work or luck or what?
I have my thoughts on this. So these are my thoughts. And first of all, I really do believe that that after the war, that the tremendous loss that the Jewish community incurred was recompensed. In other words, there was tremendous opportunity that opened up, and wealth was put back into the Jewish community. Of course, George Soros being one of those individuals. However, he thinks different. And I do believe that, yes, it's not only because he invested in learning about hedge funds and got in early, and he really built quite a economic empire. But he thinks different. His theory is about how to deal with contrasting thought. And there's a lot more to it, but I'm going to get to this point. He looks at two sides, and he looks at events that are happening in the world and how ideas are shaping those events. And then he happens to look at what's the fine line that nobody can see in between, the obscure. And when he sees something coming together in this obscure world, he acts on it. And this is how he quote unquote, broke the Bank of England. He saw this differential between what was happening with the pound and how he could actually influence that in England, how he could actually influence the price and make money from the fall of the pound. And he saw these obscure things and he acted. And this is how he made his fortunes.
Are you suggesting there was something wrong in his what was called the break of the Bank of England? Actually, I think it was the man who broke the Bank of England.
It's called the man who broke the Bank of England. Well, I am just suggesting this is how he did it. Okay.
No, but are you suggesting there was something wrong, or just that he did it?
This is how he did it.
Because
personally, if you're going to, if you know something is going to affect other people in a very negative way, and you choose to take that route, I think that is a real strong moral and ethical problem. And he got caught doing the same thing in Thailand. He had some problems in, I believe it was Malaysia. I don't want to be quoted on that. But he has seen these different places where people weren't necessarily paying attention. He could capitalize on it, and he did it.
So in my understanding of what happened, I think it was 1992, was that the UK was trying to support the value of the pound, and he did a $10 billion short of the pound, thinking that the pound was going to decline, and it did, and so he made $1 billion. Currency traders trade in the marketplace on a regular basis. Michael Lewis wrote a book called The Big Short about people that made the same bet against U.S. real estate in 2000 and 2008. I think firmly that shorts, just like longs, are important to the marketplace, because you got people that are positive about what's going to happen, you people that are negative, and that's what makes a market.
I'm not going to disagree with you. That's why I was just saying this is what he did. I mean, there's a lot of people that have written articles about how bad this was. And you're in finance, so you are the man that I would be asking the question to, what's your position on this? Because this is
I'm personally convinced that real estate in the United States, Canada, a lot of major cities around the world are dramatically overpriced. And I've been of this opinion for a while. My problem is I don't have the guts to short it. The Economist, Goldman Sachs, lots of people have written articles about how real estate is overpriced and has got to come down, but it doesn't go down. It keeps on going up. And so, if I had the money and I had the guts, I'd probably put in a big short against real estate. But I don't have that guts, and I don't have the money. George Soros made a bet against the pound, and he was right. And the pound has continued to decline almost ever since. And Brexit was another cause of even further decline. And so there's been numerous things that have happened in the UK over time that have created a decline in the UK pound. The Canadian dollar, people have taken positions against the Canadian dollar, and they've been right and they've been wrong. And that's what currency trading is all about. Anyway, it's an interesting background to someone who built one of the largest net worths of any financier. And then what he did is he donated, I think it was like half of his net worth into a charitable organization, which I think what you're focused on. And so we're going to come back after a message and talk a little bit more about that. Everyone, we're going to be back in just 2 minutes with Hadassah Jacobs, an author of a book about Trump versus Soros. Stay with us. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I have an interesting conversation tonight with Hadassah Jacobs. She is the author of a new book, Soros versus Trump, Soros versus Trump, that highlights the issues and the men that she says are currently dividing America. She's also the chief content strategist for a marketing company in Chicago, Olive Tree Works and the executive director of a new think tank, ID3 Strategic Solutions. She's a content alchemist and a digital polymath. You graduated cum laude from Florida Atlantic University with a BA in Jewish Studies and History. She's got an MA in National Security from Haifa University and is currently a PhD candidate. And her thesis right now is the ideological trends that undermine the U.S. and Israeli ethos. Welcome back, Hadassah, to the show. Tell me, if you could, what is a content alchemist? What a fascinating term.
A content alchemist. Well, there's a story behind that, but I won't go into it. A content alchemist is very similar to an ancient alchemist where they were trying to take different metals and through a process turn them into gold. And so a content alchemist is someone who draws from a lot of different genres and is able to start combining and connecting the dots to really touch their audience, to speak to their audience, to solve problems, and to what we call create digital gold. And that is kind of the goal. So you are really strategic in your messaging, but strategic messaging draws from a lot of different places. It's not just focused on one thing. And so a content alchemist has that ability to draw from a lot of different sources and see where the convergence is and then create the content from there.
Okay. And what is the story behind Content Alchemist?
Okay. So why do I call myself a content alchemist?
Yeah,
so,
it's a fascinating word.
It's a fair. Well, okay, here we go. So when I list on LinkedIn, right, or any of my platforms, what I do: an entrepreneur, an author. I write and research in several different genres: politics, health and wellness, and building marketing, influencing platforms. I mean, this is what I help people do in coaching and consulting. And so when I write all of these things out, it's so long. So one day I decided I'm going to ask ChatGPT, what am I when I do all of these different things? Because that's a lot of things, and it's kind of embarrassing, actually. Right. And so when I put it all in there and I gave him explicit detail, he came out and said, you are a content alchemist and a digital polymath. And I said, that's a book. I said, I am going to delve into this. So I had to ask, well, what is a content alchemist? So I asked what a content alchemist was. And I said, and I got the list of what it was. And I said, oh my gosh, that is exactly what I am. And then a digital polymath is someone that knows how to navigate the digital world and to actually create content and help others create content for the digital world. And since I have been dabbling in the digital world since the digital world started to manifest itself with Apple I and Apple II, these are just two very congruent fields for me. So I said, oh my, I am going to brand myself as the content alchemist. So that's how it all began.
Fascinating terms that you've applied to yourself. So let's come back to the book, Soros versus Trump, which I presume is available online, or how does one buy it?
On Amazon and other book platforms. But it is available. It's available in both Kindle and it is available in the paperback as well. And it is on Amazon in Canada as well as America and around the world. Yes.
Now, there's been a lot written about Soros. Some would say it's fact. Some would say it's conspiracy theories. Is yours fact or conspiracy theories or some combination, or what do you think?
I think it's fact. I actually document everything that I find in research is in the book. Everything is documented. And then I do contrast consistently the ideological platform of Donald Trump and the ideological platform of George Soros. So what I'm doing is taking what is fact, and then holding the two men against themselves with the issues that America is facing, and trying to figure out the why. Why are we seeing this in America right now? Why is Soros becoming so involved in politics? Because prior to George Bush, he was not that involved. And why is Trump so fiercely defending? I mean, he's standing against all odds. Why is he so fiercely defending the foundation of America? So I try to touch on all of these issues that have been kind of manifesting themselves under the surface for quite a while in America, and the different ideologies that are converging in Washington, D.C. right now.
So Soros has been a funder of progressive causes and Democratic politicians. He was a big funder of against, as you mentioned, George W. Bush, and supposedly one of the main reasons is his distaste for the Iraqi war, and thought that the what was it? I can't remember the term, but they had munitions of destruction that George Bush,
chemical weapons. Yes,
that George Bush, was one of the main reasons why they attacked Iraq, and in the end, people that challenged that, Canada was one. Canada didn't participate in the war in Iraq, was proven right that there weren't those weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. He then funded Barack Obama. He funded numerous different progressive criminal justice issues. He funded, as you mentioned, Hillary Clinton, and he funded Joe Biden. So are you saying there's something wrong with that kind of funding?
Well, you're asking, is there something wrong with that kind of funding? However, I don't address that issue.
You address what it was.
Wrong. Is there something wrong with Adelson funding, all right, a GOP candidate, a conservative candidate? Is there something wrong? No, the answer is you have the right to fund who you want. If you want to further your ideas, then you're going to find the people that are willing to take those ideas and fund them. And so that's very important, that people have that freedom or liberty to fund what they believe. But the question is, what is he funding? And what kind of belief system is he looking for, or is he interjecting into the American society that he is funding?
Okay, what are those?
So first of all, it appears that he has a very strong agenda to uproot the Constitution of the United States and replace it with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. He is European, and he has this idea that if something is rooted in God or rooted in moral law, it is a closed society, or it is wrong, inherently wrong, because it doesn't allow. And what it doesn't allow is the real question. For example, it doesn't allow for relativism. So it doesn't allow for a criminal, that harms another individual. It doesn't allow for that individual to go free and not pay for their crimes. And you see that he has been undermining the criminal justice system in America, especially when it comes to minorities. So he makes the minority look like their crimes are insignificant to the crime that may have been thrust upon them, or I shouldn't even say crime, to the justice that may have been thrust upon them due to the repercussions of the crime. For example, George Floyd is a very big and hot topic, or there have been others that are in maybe the Black communities where there's a crime and a white cop ends up shooting or harming the Black individual. The white cop is the one that ends up going to jail, and the one who committed the crime doesn't. And then they tout that as racism, and then they actually create a narrative that makes the white person the bad guy, the black person the good guy. Now, I am not racist, but when we look at justice, we are not supposed to be biased. If you commit a crime, we have to address the crime. This has nothing to do with race. Now, is there bias? Yes, but the bias has to be addressed separately than the crime itself. And so he has been trying to undermine the criminal justice system in America based on these types of issues.
If he was here, what would he describe? How would he describe what he's been trying to do, rather than the way that you slanted it? How would he describe it, do you think?
I think he would look at them. He looks at the minority, and he feels very often that the minority is underserved. In other words, they don't get the same opportunity as someone who is not a minority. And for example, he supports the Roma population. He has been helping them in Europe. It's one of the most underserved populations in Europe. And he has helped to build that community. And one of the largest is in Turkey. One of the second largest is in the Ukraine. However, it's very interesting, and I'm not sure we want to walk down this road today, maybe another time, but it's very interesting how he fights for the Romas, let's say in the Ukraine, how he does not like how the government acts when they commit crimes. And they have been known for their criminal acts, thefts, and among other things. And the government goes to crack down on him, and he says, "Well, that's not right. You can't do that. This is a minority. They don't get the same. They don't get the same privileges. So you have to be much more tolerant with them." And so on and so forth.
I don't think he's been arguing that you need to be more tolerant. I think he has been arguing, and he's given over $1 million to PACs that have been in support of progressive justice reform, which I think a lot of people, particularly since George Floyd, as you correctly point out, but I think for a long period of time, have thought was potentially biased against not only African Americans but against other minorities. And you see, just last couple of weeks, there's been a major bill for reparations against African Americans in California. In Ontario, here we had a law passed, a potential law passed in regards to reparations against Indigenous Canadians. I think a lot of people think that there is racism, maybe institutionalized racism within the criminal justice system. The percentage of African Americans in the prison system is dramatically greater than their proportion of the population, and Indigenous people, both in Canada and the United States, are even more so represented in the criminal justice system. So I don't believe, and maybe this is his slant rather than fact, because I don't know, I haven't researched it, but I think he would say that he's not asking for leniency. What he's asking for is equity and fairness. And the state of Minnesota was found by the American justice system just last week or two that it was institutionally racist, and that the whole system was effectively charged by the American judicial system. And those police people that were involved in that murder of George Floyd were charged with murder. And yes, he may have been a small time criminal, but I think most people would think that it wasn't appropriate to kill him for his small time crimes.
Okay, so you've raised a very good point about institutional racism. However, when we look at these particular cases, all right, you're looking at something, I think, that is much deeper. You have to ask the question, why is the Black community All right, not just institutional. You want to blame it on institutional racism? And I'm saying this, let me just give a quick background too. I worked for an all-black magazine in Chicago. All right, I was the only white face within miles, and I have worked to help and worked with Black communities. So this is a subject that when I speak about it, I have deep respect for the Black community and for a lot of the suffering that they've gone through. But when you take a minority community and you play the victim card and you make them look like they are a victim instead of building their community and giving them the tools and the resources so they don't turn to crime, but they are educated and they are able to become really exemplary citizens of a nation, okay, then you are helping them. But the
government have an argument from me in that regard. I strongly believe we need to have equal opportunities, no question. Education, healthcare, jobs, no question.
Yes. And the government of the United States, if we go back, they have, the welfare system and using the Black community as a victim community does not serve them to become the kind of citizens and empower them to become what we would call upright, upstanding citizens of the United States. When you're in a victimhood situation and you don't have your needs met, you often you will turn to crime, and it gets inbred into societies. We see these similar issues with other areas like the Palestinian area with Israel. When the human rights issue becomes a victimhood issue and they play the victim card instead of coming up with sound solutions to help these communities, then instead of fixing the problem, I really do think very often they blame it on institutional racism. But
I think that maybe on this one we differ. I think there has been institutional racism in my home municipality of Peel. The Ontario government, which is a conservative government, found that there was institutional racism within the Board of Education, that Black Canadians were streamed into technical roles, even if they had great academic results. That there was racism against Black students. The number of suspensions for Black students was dramatically higher than for white students, even if they did the same sort of thing. I think that there has been lots of studies that have shown that there is institutional racism. And frankly, I think that there has been a lot of people that believe that anti-Semitism, maybe not institutionalized within our penal system or our criminal justice system, but is still present in our community, which is terrible. And I don't think that's victimhood. I think that is an honest reflection of the prejudices that some people have. We've had lots of anti-Islamophobia, analyses, studies, and laws put in place. And so I think that there is prejudice and racism against that. Anyway, we're going to take a break for some messages and be back in just 2 minutes. And we're going to now change from Soros to Trump, because this book is about both gentlemen. And I think it's going to be interesting to hear what the ideological beliefs are that Hadassah Jacobs believes that Trump was bringing to the fore. Stay with us, everyone. Interesting conversation tonight. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Hadassah Jacobs. She's coming to us from Jerusalem, Israel. She is an author of an interesting book on Trump versus Soros that's available on Amazon and Kindle, etc. And she describes herself as a digital polymath and as a content alchemist. Fascinating descriptions. Obviously, someone that's very interested in history and politics. And George Soros versus Donald Trump is a book about how these two gentlemen in her thesis are representative of this ideological challenge that we're having in the United States today. Let's, Hadassah, if we could turn to Donald Trump. And let me preface your comments, if I could, by there are some people that actually don't think that Donald Trump is ideological at all. He just is a narcissistic business person that wanted to become president, and may have done that because Obama humiliated him at a press conference, not a press conference, the press dining speech where he belittled Donald Trump and his ambitions back when Obama was the president. And that he used to be a Democrat and became a Republican and took on some Republican ideologies just because that was the best way for him to get elected. So some people think it's all about Donald Trump, not about the ideology. What's your response to that? You obviously have a different point of view.
Oh, absolutely. No, for Trump, it is very much about the American ethos. And that ethos is that it's that pursuit of happiness, right? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is the American ethos and the American dream. And it is obvious that it was far more than Trump just being narcissistic. When he saw what was happening under the Obama administration, he began to realize that something was attacking that ethos. And if we want to go into the academic area, academically, there has been a huge move since the 1950s and 1960s to align itself academically with the European ethos, and in many, many ways, the European ethos that actually brought Europe to the brink in World War II with the Holocaust, which is the driving force of nihilism. So it's very interesting that Trump began to see these things. And one of the things he saw was what was happening in the Middle East. When Obama went in and he gave his great speech in Egypt, and he kind of, apologized for the American ethos, for what has been called American exceptionalism. He apologizes for our presence in the world, and then he springboards what became known as the Arab Spring. Now, at that point, all right, we start to see a huge shift politically in the Middle East, and countries like Saudi Arabia and Egypt begin to pull back from America. And why is that? Because the level of American involvement with Obama at that point was its connection to the Muslim Brotherhood. There was this push to replace some of the more radical leaders that they believed were in the Middle East, like Gaddafi, all right, and Mubarak, and to replace them with leaders from the Muslim Brotherhood. And so with that, all right, they began to undermine the strategic coalition of the nations, things that had been very stable for decades. They began to undermine it in the Middle East. And one of the things you began to see... So
are you saying that Gaddafi and Mubarak were good guys and should have been left in power?
Actually, we had a stable region, and I'm not saying they were good. Well, they actually weren't good. I mean, if I'm going to be very clear, they were not good leaders. In fact, they really were dictators and very terroristic, especially Gaddafi, on the nation itself. However, even though that was the case, the Obama administration went in to undermine these dictators and never followed through on that. And you see this with you really see it with the graffiti that was on the walls in Egypt at the time, because once the protests began and everything began to fall, there was no one there to pick up the pieces. And the young people that would write the graffiti, they'd say, "Where are you, America? Where are you, America?" They had no one there to help them pick up the pieces. And they didn't ask, "Where are you, Rome? Where are you, Europe? Where are you, NATO? Where are you, Russia?" They said, "Where are you, America?" And we were not there. We were not there. We wanted change. We might have been the catalyst, but we weren't there to pick up the pieces.
So I'll give you a slightly different point of view, and I'm obviously not nearly as knowledgeable about you on this topic, but I think that that Gaddafi and Mubarak and people like that were bad actors and dictators, and they deserved what came to them. But I don't believe that the United States actually was working for regime change. I think that Obama's speech certainly set a point of view, but I don't think the United States or anyone should be involved in regime change in a different country. And one of the problems when you've got protests, when you've got coup d'etats, when you've got overthrows of government, and you want democracy, is people have the right to make bad decisions, regrettably, and you can't enforce your own point of view and your own chosen new dictator and argue that it's democracy. And you know what's happened in Russia in the last little while is a best example. I think a lot of people would think that it would be great to see Putin gone, but there's a big risk there, because who replaces Putin if Putin never leaves might not be as good as Putin, might be a lot worse. And the head of Wagner, if he had been successful, Bajorjan or whatever the name is, might have been a lot worse than Putin. So you don't control what happens after. That's democracy. That's freedom. That's fair elections. And the people get to choose the Muslim Brotherhood if they want. Some people think that that democracy is terrible, but as Churchill said, it's better than all the other options.
And I agree with you there. However, when you are the country that is the catalyst behind the protests, then you need to be standing with the people who want democracy, who are protesting. And if you don't do that, and you don't continue to support them, and you leave them in a vacuum, that's a very sad thing. And we did that. And furthermore,
but it's interesting. So what your argument is effectively that I think is that in Egypt, in Saudi Arabia, in Libya, maybe in Afghanistan, lots of examples we could draw, is that we should be more involved. And right now, Soros is very involved in Kazakhstan and I think it's Azerbaijan. I can't remember.
And Ukraine.
And there are some people within Communist Party organizations and other things that don't want him involved, and other people saying, no, you're the catalyst for great change, you should get more involved. So it's interesting that people have this, and you've talked about Soros's impact on progressive ideas in the United States. He's been probably one of the biggest funders of democracy movements in Eastern Europe, and has credited as one of the people that really caused that change. And let me come back to Trump, though, because we've been focused on Soros a lot. So how do you feel about, denying the election results? Was that appropriate? Is that in concert with the Constitution? What about the insurrection? Or do you think those two things were appropriate and called for?
Well, I mean, we have, as far as the insurrection, I think, you've asked a very good question. However, there are a lot of different things in play when you're looking at that insurrection. And was it really an insurrection? How violent was it? What was really behind that? And when Tucker Carlson came out with the videos that were not available after the insurrection, you see so many of those videos, everything was very calm. The police were working with them. So what was really taking place, and on whose side is this entire explosive narrative of the insurrection paying or playing into? Like, who's benefiting from this? And so that has always been questions that I have. Even the stolen elections, is it possible? I don't even just look at did it happen or didn't happen, but we see it happening in other areas of the world. So why can't it happen in America? So, and I had a friend that actually wrote a book. I can't remember his name, but he wrote a book and spoke about 20 years ago and the book was titled Stolen Elections. And he talks about how there are groups in the country that are out to steal the elections. So was it possible to be a stolen election? Absolutely. Have they been able to prove it's a stolen election? Not yet. Or maybe they never will. So the insurrection itself, I tend to think that there's a lot of bias working here and not looking at the whole of the story. And they're pinning all of that on Trump. And I think
they haven't pinned it on Trump yet. Obviously,
ideological, right? They haven't yet, but they're trying to.
There's still a potential that there's still a potential, obviously, that he'll be charged, and a lot of people believe that indictment is coming down. But the leaders of the Proud Boys and some other organizations have been found guilty for some of the longest sentence ever for insurrection by a criminal justice system in the United States that I think believes in the Constitution and the things that you're arguing for. So are you saying that those findings by judges and by juries that have found those people guilty of insurrection are wrong or somehow biased and are
Well, I think it's interesting if you start to look at that in the backdrop of other protests that take place in the country. And you also have proof that there were people that work within Soros-funded organizations that were also planted in that insurrection. And then you look at the fact that groups like Antifa can ravage cities like Portland, Oregon, without any kind of penalty. And then you look at some of the major protests where, without doubt, you track the money and you're going to go back to Soros-funded organizations. If you start tracking all of this, then you need to look at what happened on January 6th in a completely different way. Is there bias in the court system?
I think,
and is that bias towards conservatives in the GOP?
I think that January 6th was an insurrection. I think that the election was a fair election, and I think every court has found that. And I think that some of the key people within Trump's own cabinet have come out very strongly and said that it was a fair election, and that there weren't the infractions that you're suggesting and that Trump is suggesting. And I think that Trump did not stand up for the Constitution, and has not stood up for the Constitution. And the best two proofs are the fact that he argued against the election, did not do what every other president in history has done with the peaceful transfer of power, and either stood back and allowed the insurrection to take place, or we'll find out, actually actively supported it. And I think that American exceptionalism died with Donald Trump, because he actually did the opposite of what you're suggesting, which is didn't actually stand up for the Constitution at all. He stood up for himself and not the Constitution. Anyway, we're going to take a break and come back in 2 minutes with some concluding comments. Stay with us, everyone. This is a really interesting discussion tonight. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Really quite an interesting discussion tonight with Hadassah Jacobs. She's an author of a book about George Soros versus Donald Trump that's available on Amazon and Kindle, etc. And her argument is that these two gentlemen really represent this ideological fracture within the United States today, and that George Soros is supporting an open society that is against the American Constitution, and Donald Trump is supporting the American Constitution. I've got a different point of view that Donald Trump is actually the best example that we've ever had of someone that opposes and has not been in favor of the American Constitution. And so it's interesting. We got such diametrically different points of view, but I guess that's what makes life interesting, is that you get people that have these different points of view. Hadassah, what's your final message?
Well, first I want to say, Mark, I'm sorry,
Brian.
Brian. Brian, Brian, I want to say that the dialogue we're having right now is a very typical dialogue where we have two different opposing perspectives. And the real important thing is that we can dialogue about it and that we can actually face this and go through and look at the problems and come up with solutions. This is the important thing. But I will say this, that when it comes to ideology, and Trump himself, I think we're going to see that Trump, from the very beginning of when he started to run for president, he was attacked from day one. And when you start looking into the attack of that, all right, then you begin to understand why he probably took the stand he did against the progressive and democratic party on the day in 2020. However, like yourself, I personally don't necessarily condone these type of things, but these are the issues we're facing. Also, when we look at George Soros, he has created a network in over 151 countries. He is driving a certain ideology of human rights and is standing very strongly against closed or any type of moral law. And if we're looking at the issues of moral law, then we have a different conversation. And I just wanted to quote this particular quote from Gerard Pierre. He says, "He who controls the trend will control the narrative, and ultimately the narrative controls the will of the people." And if you're looking for traditional values in a conservative message that is garnered among the people in America and on the global stage versus a progressive message that is removing traditional values and changing the landscape of what we would call a constitutional America or a conservative platform for nations on the global stage, then the discussion between Soros and Trump and beyond is warranted. That's what I want to say.
Okay, I appreciate it. I'll give you my 2 cents. And again, you're far more knowledgeable than I on this topic. But I think that the Republican Party in the United States and true conservatives have a real problem. I think that the Christian right has a real problem because I think that what Donald Trump has done, whether it be the access to Hollywood tapes, his sexual assault that he's been found guilty of, his indictment on keeping national security secrets records to himself, I think all suggest that he's not a moral person. I think that he wasn't a ideological conservative. I think he adopted some of those things. I think you said he wasn't attacked. I think part of the problem is both the Democratic Party and the Republican competitors didn't attack him early enough, and he ended up effectively taking over the Republican Party. And I think that the Republican Party has got a choice today. And it's an existential choice. They can either stand up for ideology, which you have been arguing. They can stand up for the principles of the Constitution. They can stand up for, the historical success and principles of the Republican Party and walk away from Donald Trump, who was a narcissist that I believe took over the Republican Party and took it to the wrong direction, and the Christian right, or the moral people, whether it be Jewish or Muslim or whatever, wouldn't accept this kind of behavior in anyone else. And why they accept it with Donald Trump is beyond me. And I think that the most true thing that's ever been said was Donald Trump saying he could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot someone and he would get away with it. And I don't know why that has happened, but I think it's because the Republican Party became the Donald Trump Party. And I think that's a huge mistake. And I think that the election was not stolen. I think the election was fair and square. And I think that people that have continued to suggest that there was anything but that are not supporting the American Constitution and aren't supporting freedom and aren't supporting democracy. They're actually supporting the dictatorship. And I think the people that were involved in the insurrection on January the 6th deserve to go to jail. And I think that lots of them have, more of them will. And I firmly believe that there's going to be an indictment of Donald Trump. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens, because if there's an indictment, I believe, regrettably, that there's going to be a lot of people within the conservative movement and within the Republican Party that object to that and say that it's a legal system that's taken over by the Democratic Party and by Joe Biden. And that's wrong. They should stand up for what's right. They should stand up for the justice system. They should stand up for the courts. They should be the law and order party that they always were. And so I think this is going to be the opportunity for the Republican Party and for the United States and people on the right to decide whether they love America or love just conservative values in the Republican Party and Donald Trump. And I think it's going to be a really interesting situation. And I think we've seen that in lots of other countries as well, where people decide whether they just love their own point of view or whether they truly love their country and democracy. And sometimes in democracy, you got to accept that the other side wins. You got to accept the other side wins, because we don't have one point of view. Anyway, Hadassah, I want to read your book because I found this conversation fascinating. And I think you're right. We have to listen to the other side and we have to debate the other side. We've got to consider the other side, because that's the only way in the end we'll come together. Anyway, that's our show for tonight, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online, even from Israel, at saga960am.ca. Good night, everybody.